I thought it was about time to do another egg scattering species, and since I haven't done any tetras yet, figured I would start with Ember Tetras. Now, any kind of egg scattering fish, let alone a tetra, is not going to be the easiest thing in the world to breed, but it wasn't too bad. So I'm going to show you what I've learned so far after working with them for a few months. As usual, I want to start off by talking about how to sex the fish. Now, this is admittedly somewhat difficult for Ember Tetras. If I went to a store right now and tried to pick out males and females, I really don't think I could. The good news is, if you just buy a big enough group, 6 to 8 maybe, and then bring them home, feed them well, and let them mature for a little bit, there will be a very obvious difference. If you look at this group that I have here, you'll see that some of them are much larger and rounder in shape than the others, and those are the females. Given some good food, they blow up like balloons, they're full of eggs. It gets pretty easy eventually to tell the difference, but other than that body shape that happens over time, I don't think I've found another good way to tell the difference. So, I think your best bet is to buy a reasonably large group and then just hope for an assortment as they grow out. So, step number one for me was to buy a group, let them mature, and feed them really well in the meantime. And for me, that was primarily live baby brine shrimp and live Daphnia. Once I started actively trying to get the fish to breed, my primary concern was how to collect the eggs or how to separate them from the parents so that they wouldn't eat them. Ember tetras are, like many egg scattering fish, very likely to eat the eggs or small fry once they hatch, so they have to be separated some way unless you're in a very densely planted tank situation, and some might live in that case. But for me, I'm kind of doing this the artificial route where I want to capture the eggs, hatch them elsewhere where they'll be safe, and then raise the fry there. So I did a few experiments to see what would be an effective way of collecting these eggs. I've heard at least once before that Ember tetras like to spawn in plants. So the first thing I tried was to use an egg trap. And the idea here is I have a cup or a little container, and inside of it, a clump of bushy plant material. And the idea is the fish will swim in there, they'll lay their eggs, and then I can just remove that cup, and I've got my eggs. And for the record, that did work. I would say it's maybe not the best option, but I was able to collect some eggs that you can see here, a relatively small number, and these eggs were the first that I hatched and raised, and we'll see those fry grow up in a few minutes. While I had the egg trap set up, I spent a lot of time watching the fish. I recorded hours and hours of footage trying to see what the actual mating behavior looks like, and I'll be honest with you, I never saw it. However, males and females actually get together and create a fertilized egg must be pretty subtle and maybe sneaky because I never saw it. I probably watched 32 to 40 hours of footage and never saw it happen once, despite the fact that I was collecting fertile eggs. What I did notice was that the tetras seemed to be spending a lot of time not necessarily in the plant material in the egg trap, but around it. In fact, I saw them hanging out pretty often underneath this Anubias plant, and if you see here, this female, she's kind of pecking at the rock underneath it. I don't know if tetras do this, but when I think about my experience breeding cichlids, pecking at the ground is oftentimes a good sign that a fish is thinking about laying eggs there, and it just got me wondering if maybe they're not so picky about spawning in a plant, but just near it and around it. If that's true, then that makes an egg trap not really ideal for collecting the most eggs at once. So the next thing I did was to put together a tank made specifically for capturing loosely scattered eggs. Now, there's a whole other video on that if you want to learn more about it, but the idea was I created little rafts covered in mesh that would cover almost all of the bottom of the tank, and then I would just put plants on top of those rafts, let the fish do their thing, and see if that improved the amount of eggs I could collect at once. Just to cover a few bases on how to get these fish to actually spawn. For one, I was working with tap water for the most part, which for me is moderately soft and has a neutral pH. I was running the temperature at about 77 degrees, and that seemed to work out fine. And otherwise, I basically followed kind of a typical tetra spawning routine, which is to move a female into the tank first, let her get comfortable for a day, and then the next night, add a male. The idea is they'll spawn first thing the next morning. I did try a few different combinations of male and female, such as one female, one male, one female, multiple males, maybe multiple females. I'm not sure I saw an outstanding difference in any configuration, especially using these egg trap rafts that I created here, but I have a suspicion that if anything, they might be better off with more males than females in terms of a ratio. The males are small and they're pretty timid. The females are actually the much more aggressive of the pair, and I kind of have a feeling that in order to get a lot of eggs fertilized, we might need more males. I can't confirm that yet. I need to do a lot more experimenting, but I kind of have that feeling, at least with this species. Another part of the typical routine for spawning tetras is employing cool water changes. And I gave that a try. I tried doing slightly cooler water changes with tap water. I also, just out of curiosity, tried it with RO water. And I would agree, it does seem to stimulate some spawning activity. I'm not sure it's 100% necessary, but I did notice enough difference to say I think it helps. So the good news is those egg trapping plates that I put on the bottom of the tank, they worked very well. Now this lighting is terrible because this is kind of what you have to do to spot the eggs on the bottom. They're completely transparent. So I would keep the lights off in the tank and then shine a small but bright flashlight laterally across the bottom, and it would make them much more visible. But as you can see, we've got a lot of eggs here. Many more eggs than I was able to capture in the egg trap. But as is often the case, getting eggs is the easy part. Now let's talk a bit about the actual hatching and fry development. Let's just take a quick look one more time at one egg by itself. You can see it's completely transparent, very small. I've seen smaller. Scarlet Batis eggs were smaller than this, but this is still very, very tiny. They also hatch quickly. I was surprised by that. For me, they were hatching between 18 and 24 hours. Here we can see one that just recently hatched. This is the least developed, most transparent, and most helpless fry I've ever seen. It's moving right now because I'm shining a light on it, but in general, they hold very still. I raised this first group of fry in a German breeding ring, and from hatch time till I found them clinging to the glass, which I would consider kind of the starting posture for a newly hatched fry, that was 3 or 4 days. That was one thing that I read about Ember Tetras before starting to breed them, was that they develop very, very slowly, and I have found that to be completely true. Even from this point, it was another week before I saw them really moving around. Still, as soon as I saw them clinging to the glass, I figured, if not today, then very soon they're going to start looking for food. And at this stage, I was feeding them almost entirely paramecium. On this view, you can see there's a couple of fry hiding in a plant, and those little white streaks that are cruising around in the water, those are the paramecium. Maybe this is why they grow so slow, but the fry didn't seem to actively hunt things down. They would just hold still and wait for something to come in front of their face and then snap at it. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, I fed them, again, almost exclusively paramecium. There was a phase where I thought I might involve some vinegar eels, and I tried it once, but to me, it just wasn't worth the effort of harvesting them. I have my paramecium culture right here, and it actually did a good job of taking them all the way to a size where they could start to eat baby brine shrimp. And that's about this size right here. Fairly soon after switching them to baby brine shrimp, their growth rate did pick up a little bit, not much, but a little bit, and they started to get more confident and more aggressive about seeking out food. And you can see by the size of their stomachs that clearly by now they've become much less shy about eating. Once they're on brine shrimp, just like every other fish I've dealt with, it's pretty much smooth sailing from here. I'll go ahead and cut forward to some current footage. Here the fish are about 2 to 2.5 months old, and they're still very small. They're still growing slowly in comparison to other species. These are probably 20% the size of the adults. But that's good enough for me. They're coming along just fine in my opinion, and given a little bit more time, I think they'll be large enough to let them start schooling with the adults. So what do you say? Doesn't seem too bad, right? I think in hindsight, the part of it that I would call the most difficult is just the live food aspect. You saw those fry when they were much less developed. They are not active eaters. I don't know, but I could see it being very challenging to attempt this with dry food. Those paramecium really came in handy. I think that'll do it though. This was a good introduction to tetras, and I've already brought home a group of a different tetra species to work on next, so I'm really looking forward to that. I think I'll wrap up with that. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.